Thank you all so much for joining us for our Ignite Startup Workshop. My name is Amanda Golden, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Herb Kelleher Entrepreneurship Center, where we promote the development of entrepreneurial skills and support the exploration of the ways these skills can be applied to careers as founders or innovators within established organizations. Our Ignite Startup workshops provide an opportunity for attendees to learn more about different topics related to new venture creation. These workshops host leaders from various industries and on-campus experts and enable students, faculty, staff, and the greater Austin entrepreneurial community to gain usable skills and insights for launching an idea into a startup or pursuing other career opportunities. Today, we will be taking questions from our audience. You can use the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar to submit those questions. And we will be recording this workshop and sending a link to our attendees a couple of days after today so that you can maybe watch anything you might have missed. Today, we're excited to welcome with us Andrew Hutton to provide an overview of the ideation process. Andrew is the founder and CEO of Day One, a community-powered learning platform that is educating and supporting the entire world of entrepreneurship. Before launching Day One, Andrew was the Chief Innovation Officer at Human Ventures, a venture studio and fund in New York City. Andrew has also held roles as a design strategist and professor of strategic design and loves combining empathy and human-centered approaches to business problems of all kinds. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Amazing. Thank you for that intro, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here. Excited to share. Excited to just unpack some of this journey of entrepreneurship and hopefully dig into more questions. It's going to be a really great time. So here, let me go ahead and start sharing my screen, if that's all right. And then are we off to the races?
Yeah, we're good to go.
All right, here we go. So let me take it away. Well, Amanda, you already gave a really great background. So, hey, everyone, I'm Andrew. As Amanda said, founder and CEO of Day One. I wanted to give a little bit of background, maybe a little bit of credentializing myself, also just so you sort of know where I'm coming from as I give this talk and answer your questions. But, like everybody, I've had a bit of a windy career. I got my start. The start of my career, I'll kind of come back to. I got a master's degree. So a lot of folks, whether it's undergrad or graduate, I know the shoes you're in. I got my master's degree from Parsons, a very kind of odd sounding degree, strategic design and management, but I really got my introduction to design thinking and strategic design from the school perspective. But I took it into consulting. I did my years as a management consultant, started to put the other side of the brain into work by, doing design strategy work, a lot of facilitation, but a lot of also new product, new service design, experience design. And like a lot of folks, I wanted to get closer to the action from just doing strategy and just working with management teams. So I pushed my way over to the world of startups and joined a venture startup studio called Human Ventures. So based here in New York, where went on the whole learning curve of how a venture gets launched and got to work on startups with amazing founders firsthand. We launched about a dozen businesses in 2.5, 3 years or so. But like a lot of folks, even that wasn't close enough to the action for me. And I really wanted to go build my own thing. And it just so happened that the thing that became the right thing for me to build and launch was a new kind of support system, something that kind of zigged when the whole world of venture was zagging and said, how can we support, as Amanda said, the entire world of entrepreneurship? And so I've been building Day One now for the last year or so, launched last summer, and excited to kind of dig in. We've been supporting hundreds and hundreds of founders in the last year. And so excited to bring a lot of those perspectives today. And just like another thought as way of introduction, please throw questions into the chat or the Q&A. I will probably not get to them. And so I'm sorry if I just go on for 30 minutes or so, but I'm really excited to take questions at the end and just dialogue and get into it. So I'm excited to make this as interactive as we can. So, but here's, as a bit of a segue, here's a big why behind what we do at Day One, and really just something that I want to proffer up for everybody, which is we are living in an entrepreneurial economy. I think that's something that It didn't happen yesterday. It's been coming, whether it's the new tools and platforms that have enabled entrepreneurship, or it's just the opportunities and the problems that are surfacing that we're all noticing with fresh eyes. The pandemic did accelerate this world 5 or 10 years. And we've tried to put some numbers to it. These are almost certainly undercounting the types of entrepreneurs that are out there, whether it's freelancers or side hustles, or of course, small businesses to big businesses. And by our count, every year, we're seeing 6 million new entrepreneurs enter the game in the US alone. Again, almost certainly undercounting, but 6 million new entrepreneurs, whether those are freelancers or new EINs being created. And in a lot of ways, the world of venture capital is just this tiny little sliver. Any given year, there's maybe 4,000 to 6,000 seed and pre-seed funding events out of 6 million new entrepreneurs. And so this is a big part of what we see as the new entrepreneurial economy, which is it's so much more diverse than just the venture-backed startup. And what we try to do at Day One is really help founders of all stripes apply the best-in-class toolkits, connect into the best networks, and have the support systems to go on that journey. And so actually that's a little bit of what we do at Day One, just to kind of have one little second of a commercial as we kick things off, is we've created a support system. Sometimes we call it an online university. Sometimes we just call ourselves a community, but it's a mixture of programs, memberships, resources, all meant to support entrepreneurs as they get going and build businesses. And so, and it's with that lens that we help folks through all the stages of the process. But today, just to get into it now, we're going to be talking about the very beginning of the journey. And so I have this mental model. Actually, I'll just show it to you right here, which is, here's the steps of the journey as I see it that take us through to, this is not towards scale. This is not to your IPO. This is towards a working, running business that has itself then all the new problems that you're going to have when you scale and grow. But these 5 steps are distinct stages in the early process of getting a new business off the ground. So ideation, exploration, definition, testing, and traction. So let me unpack each of these. We're going to talk about ideation today, but I figured ideation is such a word that can mean almost anything to anybody that I figured it would be smart for me to just lay it out so you can know what I mean when I say ideation. And you can also kind of get a lay of the land in terms of what the steps would look like if you are at the very early stage, or heck, if you're in the middle of it, maybe you skipped a step, we can talk about that too. So here's what we're going to talk about today. Here's what I mean by ideation. I mean the stage of the journey where you're determining your personal fit as well as you're picking a market. And so ideation is the verb, right? It's about exploring broadly, but those are the 2 quotients that we're going to be talking about, and that I think are the first 2 pieces that you need to be picking off. You're not designing a business model just yet. You're not designing a solution, a product. You're figuring out a market. And of course, you're thinking about yourself. From there, if you get to the next step, you're digging into your customer, your competition, the market, right? This is research. This is deeper research. And exploration and ideation, you might think they're very similar. They indeed are. You probably are going to go back and forth between these 2 stages quite often. It's certainly not a linear journey. And these are the 2 that you're most likely going to vacillate in between, where you think you are excited about a market. You think you have a great kind of, it's pulling you there. And then you start to do the research and you realize maybe there's not a there. Or you start to get more excited. And so, but it is a distinct step to go deep, right? To do this research, to talk to the customers, to unpack all the different products that are in the market, and to just understand what's really happening. If you've done that, if you've got that landscape of some deep research into a market, into a space, naturally the next step is the what. What is your innovation? What is this value prop, the new business that you're going to be bringing into the world? This stage is all about the core insight, the core, call it an innovation, call it that, the outcome of a human-centered design process. But what's the thing that is driving the reason for your new business to exist, right? That's what you're putting on the table in this phase. And it's not easy. You have to, it's a lot of thinking, of course, along the way, a lot of talking. And you probably were wondering, Andrew, when are we going to start to do that lead startup thing? It's right here, right? As you have a core insight, this is what you're testing. You're taking all of your existential assumptions, your most important assumptions, that core insight, and you're running experiments. You're not building a business. You're definitely not building a company. You don't need to be incorporated. You don't need to have a brand. You're validating your core assumptions here. And then finally, if and when you've validated your core hypothesis, do you start to build your business? So I don't know if that whole framework is blowing your mind, or you're like, Andrew, those are the steps. I get it. But those are the 5 steps that every entrepreneur walks through, whether they know they're in which phase or not. You're going through those stages, and knowing is half the battle. It is extremely windy. It is not linear by any means. And so, but giving us the frame, we're going to bite off ideation today. So here's what I mean by ideation. It's kind of have just like a logical breakdown of the pieces so that you can start to play around with them yourself. There's 2 pieces: determining your personal fit and picking a market. So determining your personal fit is maybe the thing you weren't expecting. Picking a market is pretty much what you were expecting in terms of deciding on which idea and which space you're going to enter. So let's take them in order. So I have 2 frames for unpacking your personal fit. The first is figuring out your edge, right? Figuring out and taking that time to soul search, to take stock of your experiences, take stock of your skills, and understand where should you be pointing them, right? Where are you? Where do you have an advantage? And really, it's not about necessarily having the most in any of these categories. It's not just about sufficient either. It's having the right edge to take advantage of an opportunity and to attack a market. So I think it cuts across 3 things: skills, domain, and passion. Skills, again, first and foremost, pretty obvious, what you'd expect. Do you know how to do what you need to do, right? Skills could be very functional, right? Where if you're going to build a D2C business, it might make sense to be a marketer, right? If you're going to build a SaaS business, it might make sense to be a coder, right? But there's also skills related to entrepreneurship or scaling a business or just running a business, things like management, things like your ability to sell and pitch and raise money, things like your ability to handle ambiguity, right? So there's some very soft skills, some very hard skills, but just do you have what it takes? And it is a big question, right? Or what are you best suited to take on is another way to frame it. The domain, what areas do you know about? How deep do you know the space that you're starting to look into? So you know even where to look, what stones to uncover, who to talk to. Are you able to connect to the right people? But a domain expertise is actually, I'll kind of point out, I think much more important, maybe the most important thing to have when determining your edge. And then finally, we could talk a lot about the idea of, follow your passion. Do you have to be passionate about a business? I think it's important. I think it's worth following that, burning in your belly, or the thing that kind of gets you excited. And so your edge is going to sit at the intersection of these 3. So I have a thought on each of them. The first is, if you're thinking about your skills, you probably lack some of the skills needed to build a business, or the business you might be considering. Or if you look at your skill set, it doesn't tell you what business to build, right? That's generally fine, right? I think skills is more of a sufficient thing. Can you get this thing off the ground, right? You probably don't need to code these days. You can use no code tools. You can go hire developers. There's a lot of ways. There's almost always a way around a skills gap. There's definitely some exceptions to this, and there's some where it makes very little sense to go build something in like deep tech AI if you're not an actual developer or understand AI mechanics. But there's actually still almost always a way around it, right? Whether it's hiring, whether it's having a co-founder, whether it's learning the skills. There, as much as, again, I think we're in an educational environment here. Everything is learnable in a year or 2. Nothing is actually that opaque, and the world moves so fast that everything new is learned in 2 years anyway. And so there's always a way around maybe a skills gap. There's not so much around a domain gap. So you might lack domain experience. You might be like, man, I just see an opportunity in the housing market, but that's just because my brother bought a house and it was a pain and he told me about it, and I have no experience. I'm not a real estate agent. I don't know real estate finance. You're not this person, right? I would say it's much more important to have domain experience to find your edge. And this is a little nuanced. It's almost existential, where if you, I'll go up a slide. If you lack the skills, you probably know it. It's probably obvious. People can tell you, you probably feel it. You're like, man, I'm not going as fast, or I'm just like running into this gap and I'm probably gonna have to hire for it. If you lack domain experience, it's an unknown. You probably don't know what you're missing. And that's super dangerous for starting a business. If you don't know what you don't know, you're liable. Well, we'll talk about this when you're searching for like that idea. You're liable to just go after bad ideas or go after shallow ideas, right? And so, or you're liable to just not know the right people, not have the right connections, etc. And so I think domain experience is actually really important. And then passion is the thing that sits in the middle, right? All things equal, it's better to lean into your passions, right? Literally. It'll keep you going. It'll help you get more excited about it. And those are non-trivial pieces to this whole journey, is having that fire in your belly to keep at it, the motivation, the chip on your shoulder, whatever it takes to keep going. But I've seen plenty of entrepreneurs put 3 different business ideas in front of themselves that are drastically different. And they're not sorting for passion. They're just charged by the intellectual pursuit. They want to be a founder. They want to just build a big business. And so any of those things can sort of overwhelm the idea of passion in its most common form. But all things equal, it's nice to have both for yourself and to signal to other people that you're really the right fit and really excited about a space. So quick little framework there. Your skills, your domain, and your passion is your personal edge. And there's a reason I start there. That's the number one thing. If you're doing ideation, you should start with yourself. Okay. Second framework, second piece of the thought process around your personal fit is actually asking yourselves what you really want in this, right? I think we're at the stage of entrepreneurial pursuits where it's kind of all like dominated by a few narratives, right? It's maybe the Shark Tank narrative, maybe the Silicon Valley narrative. I would imagine that there's more opportunities in a business school setting because, you see different types of businesses at higher clarity than most folks out there, but it's not all venture capital or bust, right? And so it's really important to understand what kind of outcome you really want out of your entrepreneurial journey, right? Are you here to make yacht money and Elon Musk money, or are you here to make, put your kids through college money, or be very comfortable money, right? Money actually I want to say it's not always the driver. It usually is something of a driver, but you might want impacts, and you might not be able to change the world with a small business, and therefore you swing for the fences because you want to impact how, want to make a dent in the universe, right? So outcome, be honest with yourself. What do you really want out of this? And then of course, risk, right? There's really 2 quotients here. The chance of failure. Startups are super risky almost by definition. Small businesses should have a much higher chance of success. If you do, you can de-risk them a lot more, as well as frankly, like the cost. How much are you putting at risk? Whether that's actual capital or just time before it takes off, and therefore sort of an opportunity cost type of cost. The startup cost, the magnitude, and then the chance of it not working play together. What's your risk appetite? And so you thinking through your risk appetite, what's appropriate for you now? Where is your appetite? Where are you in your life? Do you have kids? Do you have a mortgage? Do you not? As well as what you're after. Just 2 very important factors that I don't think nearly enough people put their heads into. And so I think the next slide will let me jump too far. And so, like I said, this is an audience that probably sees a broader variety of different business options, right? I'm just very, very, very roughly going to say you could definitely swing for the fences. Startups are a very specific animal. Probably, again, don't tell this group, but just to say it, startups are defined by their outcome potential, right? They need to grow big. Therefore, the markets need to be big. Therefore, the business models need to be highly scalable. And therefore, you need to be the kind of entrepreneur who can work in a very scaling, highly scaled business, right? Those are a lot of things that have to go right. And you have to want it. You have to want the extra bosses, the extra pressure, the extra jobs of fundraising. You can bootstrap a business. Bootstrapping a business actually sounds like, oh no, I'm gonna have to go use my own money. You're almost certainly getting to cash flow and the ability to be paying yourself back quicker in a bootstrap business than a startup. Yes, it is possible to just like go raise on a napkin these days, but To be fair, I kind of hate that narrative. That is a narrative that is really still only available to a tiny fraction of entrepreneurs. The vast majority of entrepreneurs in building a startup, a growth-oriented business, will still bootstrap, slog through months, years of no salary, until they can, show and prove the traction to get on the venture ride. So in a lot of ways, it's a false dichotomy. Everyone's bootstrapping until they raise. And so, but you can set yourself out to not raise, do different things differently, to intentionally build a smallish business. Again, smallish because it can be plenty big and plenty impactful for you and a community and your family, but bootstrap it, right? Don't take on those extra outside investors. And again, this is so nuanced because there's always different types of investment. There's always different ways to actually get a business going off the ground. And so, but just more of a kind of rough category. Or I love the idea that entrepreneurship can stay very small, right? Whether you're a freelancer or a side hustling. Again, lots of times the next step up of a business start at a, you can start as freelancing and then create an agency. You can create a side hustle and then make it your full-time business. So picking your sort of small, medium, large outcomes and the kind of type of business that goes with it is huge. Will also act as a constraint for some of the business models and ideas that you're going to go after, as well as, just more importantly, will set you up for success. So out of left field, ideation is at least 50% about what do you want out of a business and where do you want to go, and understanding what does it mean for you to be an entrepreneur, owning that direction, and then being smart, getting the advice, getting the support to go make that happen. Okay. So let's take a breather because I've been talking fast. Now we're going to get into the actual fun side of it, meaning picking a market, the actual side of ideation that you would have thought of, right? How do you find a startup idea? How do you how do you go from not having an idea to having an idea? How did Andrew go from being an entrepreneur who helped other entrepreneurs? And actually, I lived in it. I was just seeing hundreds of ideas. I did journeys with entrepreneurs where we put 10 ideas on a whiteboard and we, saw them all for what they were. And we took 5 of them to the exploration stage and 3 of them to the definition stage. But here's my top-down sort of advice for you as you're thinking about picking a market, meaning figuring out that startup idea. Don't try to think of a startup idea. That's the punchline. It was already on the slide, right? Here's the thing. And we're going to get to something actually tactical, practical for you to do. But sitting with a notebook of ideas, just trying to say, I'm going to find one, is a recipe for this thing that Paul Graham. So these are the notes that I've taken away from a Paul Graham essay called How to Get Startup Ideas. And his takeaway, his outcome is, don't try to think of startup ideas. You're liable to run into and create a sitcom idea, an idea that sounds plausible. The writers of a sitcom, if they had to have a startup idea amongst the main characters, they would be like, oh, let's make the Uber for X and make that the idea. But it's ultimately a very, very bad idea. Instead, the advice is, and I think there's a reason I got to this slide. It's exactly the thing you should be doing, is live in the future and build what's missing, right? It's to immerse yourself in topics, innovations, markets, industries that are everything above interesting to you, passionate to you, that your skill set is suited for, and then just look around. Or, well, let me click to the next slide here. Way more than just look around, participate, do stuff. So start a newsletter, write up an industry report, literally a one-off thing. Write up a report and publish it, start to shop it around, post it on Hacker News, make it like a product, but write up a report that just says, here's the state of short-term rentals in North America. It's not just Airbnb anymore. Make a fun title, talk about it. You'll become known for it. Get active on Twitter, post it on Twitter, respond to people on Twitter, host a meetup. Just say, hey, monthly meetup for short-term rental entrepreneurs in Austin, right? I'm sure that already exists. You do not have to make it up, but maybe you could, right? Run a Kickstarter. Kickstarters don't have to be the beginning of a real business, right? They need to be honest of what you're doing and selling, but like make a thing, make a project, go kickstart an industry report for all I care, right? Put it out there, launch something on Product Hunt. If you hang around the world of Product Hunt, you'll see people launch really small stuff all the time. Go create a Notion template of all the resources about short-term rentals in Austin. I don't know why I'm going with this example. UT is kind of getting to me. And launch it on Product Hunt. You'll probably get no upvotes, but you'll start to, one, work on your muscles of launching, extremely important. And two, as you start to hit on things, that is going to be so much more telling of where your energy and where the ideas really are. And most importantly, it'll give you, you won't be static. You will have something that will open doors. And I promise you, once you even just pick your area that you're going to be hanging out in, all the good ideas are hidden. They're not in plain sight. There's almost a efficient markets hypothesis theory to startups, which is if you can think of an idea without doing real deep research, without being like deeply embedded, if you can think of an idea, someone else has tried it. And if it's not already successful, it failed for reasons that you're almost certainly likely to emulate, unless you have a distinct advantage, unless you distinctly know something that others don't and you're deeper than them. So go deep. This is how you go deep. You spend time creating, magnets, spend time being active, start talking to the other people who hang around this same area, and you're going to be onto something. You're also going to start to have those co-founders in front of you. You're going to start to have potential recruits. You're going to start to have, just friends around, right? And so this is really thing number one. This is how you do it. A little bit of what, not so much what. So let me give you 4 or 5, I think like 5 or 6 slightly more tactical examples of idea frameworks, meaning as you're doing these 2 above things, as you're going to go into the future, simmer in what's there, look around for what's missing by doing stuff, at some point you are going to have to think of ideas. You're going to have some sort of heuristics or frameworks for how to do this. And so I've got a few of them, cribs from all the folks who love to be pithy and smart and put them on Twitter and different articles. They're out there. I've pulled a bunch of them. There's a bunch more, but I think I'm actually pretty close to comprehensive in terms of what's helpful. So Keith Boy, for all his firebranding and Miami love, has a really interesting one. He's put his money where his mouth is in this idea framework because he started Open Door, and he started another one to help folks sell their businesses. Open Store, I believe is what it's called. So he loves this idea, but find a highly fragmented industry with a low NPS, like buying a house, and vertically integrate and just simplify the value. There's a ton more to it, but in the end, it's sometimes that simple. Go vertically integrate a really poor industry, right? Go figure out. Real estate is really chock full of them. I just bought a house, and so I understand how terrible it is to get a title search done, how silly the mortgage process is, how crazy it is that you pay 4% to a real estate agent, right? So not easy, but if you can kind of pull it all together, huge, right? I'm also not going to always talk about like the huge startups, because you can definitely apply these to small businesses and anything in between, but we'll get to that. These are all VCs. They generally do like to talk about about these types of things. So Mike Maples Jr., another VC at a firm called Floodgate, this is a Medium article. You can go find it. And he says this thing called backcasting. He's basically saying it's less of a framework and more of a way to do it, but he has a framework in it, which is, he basically says, you can't deduce good startup ideas. You have to, you can't use deductive logic to get there. You have to use inductive logic. You have to infer, right? It's inferences. So the idea of forecasting to him doesn't work, because it basically says from here, this is where the future is. He's basically saying you have to imagine a discontinuous future, right? You don't work from here to there, you work from there back, right? And you say, if the future is this, what must be true? His best example is Elon Musk, does this all the time, right? The thing is, he has a framework where he basically says the way that you find these discontinuous futures that you can backcast from or towards is by looking at inflection points. So if you're saying, okay, I want to find where there's some really kind of like fertile soil for ideas, look at inflection points either in technology. So what He uses the example of Lyft all the time. He doesn't talk about Uber because he didn't invest in Uber, but he did invest in Lyft. So he talks about that. Talks about Lyft and how, location technology in phones was getting so good and adoption was getting so great that it must have happened. Almost certainly a little revisionist history, but we'll give it to him, right? So technology inflection points, adoption, consumer preference inflection points, right? That's basically what day one is built on, right? There's this consumer inflection around starting a business called a prosumer, where people are going from, well, I guess it's really professional because it's a shift in their careers, right? But it's happening, and we're leaning into this in this inflection point. He talks about, I think, regulatory and maybe one or two others, right? Like, are there changes in regulation? That's what's driving psychedelics. That's just driving marijuana. That's driving telehealth, like all sorts of things. And that end, gambling, like all these regulatory changes are truly creating business opportunities. So if you just want to have some heuristics for things that you can like put in your notepad, think about transitions. Okay, my guy Eric Torenberg, love on deck, definitely a competitor, but also very respects what they've done. I think this is a really, really important framework. So I've stolen this from a big long list. I've taken all the fluff out of it. I would go after boring businesses. There's really something about taking something that's like kind of obviously would just go bananas if it was true, but it's just like so basic, but also so widespread that like people don't do it. And to be fair, there's it's hard to even think of an example of this, but like getting between two cities faster is an example of this, right? If you could just reliably cut down transit time between LA and San Francisco or New York and DC, you'd have infinite demand, right? The thing is, it's wicked hard. There's my New England coming through. It's super duper hard. There's just unbelievable challenges to it. And so you can't just like throw your hand up and be like, I'm going to solve that problem. You'd have to have like a real insight into trains or who knows what, right? But if you could do it, you would have a big business, right? And so boring, but hard and big, that people just like aren't going to take the time and effort to like basically like probably buy land to create a new train track between New York and DC, is your opportunity. If you have an insight and way to go about it, it would just be big business, right? And so there's definitely something in this whole area. It doesn't have to be that kind of like crazy and audacious, but I feel like a lot of entrepreneurial people, myself included, find myself in the like, we're going to like put some solar panels on this thing and it's going to like solve this massive problem over in the developing world. When it's like, no, those kind of like school projects, those are literally the projects I used to do at design school. Boring problems that are massively held are probably the place to go after it. And most of the time we overlook them. So if this little nudge helps you kind of think about those a little more seriously, I would highly consider it. Okay. You can go onto the web and find a bunch of even smaller type of heuristics. These are more just like ideas that can be applied. I found to like most of these, and so I threw them out there. Also, Eric and Keith are buds, so there's a lot of overlaps here. But this idea of inserting liquidity where it didn't exist, one, it's basically saying create marketplaces where there's long tails and long tails of supply and demand aren't being met. But you can also like grease the skids in all sorts of other ways, right? You can verticalize. You don't have to marketplace. You can verticalize like Open Door, right? There's all sorts of financial innovations happening where you embed financial services into other businesses, and that's the innovation. There's literally businesses that are allowing other businesses to embed financial services, and you don't even have to be that fancy about it. You can just say, hey, I'm going to sell X, but I'm going to sell it with an attached buy now, pay later loan to it. And that would probably work for a lot of businesses, right? Obviously, buy now, pay later is itself a huge business, but why not verticalize? So embedded finance, arming the rebels is always a good idea, right? Enable SMBs, whether it's Shopify or other platforms. We also see ourselves in that trend, basically arming people in different ways. Eric gets into an idea of like, just what are some very common, like, again, boring thing, sell a very boring thing, but take one quotient off of it, reduce anxiety, right? So I think there's more, he's tweeting, so he's very brief here, but there's some like insight nuance to these that I think are very, very, very in line for where you can find lots of good businesses. Here's a framework from Y Combinator. It's a video you can find online. Kevin Hales, generally what YC looks for in startup ideas. So again, a little less of like the framework to sort of like soar and more of a, this is what they think good ideas have, right? So popular, growing, popular, lots of people, growing. Those are pretty standard BC things. If you're not going that big, you almost certainly don't need to pay attention to how truly popular it is. You'd rather start niche and small. I think urgent is the best one on here, and or frequent, right? But frequent things, great businesses to build around frequent problems. That's the idea of like, man, people are driving between New York and DC all the time, right? Or a few people just, or it's just very, very, I guess that's popular more than frequent, but you get my drift, right? There's some things that can actually be very small wins, but if they happen a lot, it's a great place to go. Mandatory is close to the regulatory side of things. Expensive, interesting. I mean, there's so much cost to be cut out of legacy business models. You almost certainly don't need to be a technologist to just take something and make it enough cheaper to be meaningful for folks. And this is, again, you might do it in a very boring space, right? So here's my last one that I wish I had more of these that sort of get at intentionally small businesses, but Nick Huber, another Twitter personality, Sweaty Startup is his handle. And the idea of like, not all startups are these tech glamorous businesses, although he is saying basically apply tech. He's saying, go find a business with profit, meaning his literally area of expertise is storage businesses, right? Go find, there's another woman on Twitter that I like to follow, Cody Sanchez, who loves to buy up laundromats, right? And so, maybe there's some chunk of folks who are super into this kind of micro PE, but more as like a principle, a lot of profit and then no tech, right? Go find businesses that work, that are missing tech, and then go compete with them. So we don't have to get super fancy in our innovation here. If entrepreneurship is your goal, if your outcome is a business between $1 and $10 million in revenue, you absolutely do not need to reinvent the wheel and like try to create the next D2C, the next SaaS, anything overly fancy. You can just go build a business. And so this is like a whole new area of entrepreneurship. Again, it's not even new. This is probably the vast majority of entrepreneurs, but they don't get the play that Silicon Valley gets. So that's what I've got for us. Intentionally simple here. Would love to take questions now for the big chunk of time we have left, but ideation is this first step. Actually, I did mention, so it's kind of silly that I wrote it in a slide here, that the journey is going to be way longer than you think. Whether you're at the beginning, middle, or somewhere else along the road here, this journey, especially the very beginning, is windy. You will double back. Something that I suggest for everyone to do is find ways to give yourself time. If being in school is the place where you've like time box the chance for you to go at something, that's great. But also, any sort of artificial deadline is just that. It might force something to end prematurely, right? Whereas businesses take time, ideas take time, this journey takes time. So just be super prepared for it to take longer than you think and set yourself up for that. That might mean just financially figuring out how to stay the course, whether it's a side hustle or keeping your job or whatever it might be, right? So ideation is the first step. It's going to be windy and long. And then, your goal, figure out yourself and then figure out an idea. Not easily said, right? And so your homework is work on both. Do some soul searching, take stock of your domains and your passions, and those don't have to be professional. They could be totally your hobby, your side hustle. That could totally be just something that you want to get into, and you're going to give yourself time to do it, right? But then on your way there, I promise you, the ideas are not, your business idea is not the result of you brainstorming a list based on those frameworks I gave you. Your business idea is based on you doing stuff that is throwaway, that is just gets you into the game in a domain in an area that you start to engage, and your ideas grow because you're collaborating with others, because you're just at the very forefront of the industry, of the space, the problem area. And then you look around, and then people probably give you the ideas, and you'll now have the sense for like what's really good and how to vet them and how to activate them and how to take them forward. So do some soul searching, and then do something public, and do it halfway, I mean, don't delay, right? Don't wait until it's perfect. Just get started. So that's what I've got for you. Thank you so much for listening in. You can check out Join Day One, or joinday1.com, day one. But I'd love to take some questions. Amanda, I'd love to well, no, it's just me and you. So I can either leave it here or we can come off the screen.
Yeah, we can go ahead and if you want to take down your slide, we can
share. Here we go.
Yeah, facilitate some of these questions. To get started, Andrew, one of the things I was wondering is, how do you recommend this framework that you went through be sort of tweaked to be applied to those who, maybe they're still trying to decide whether or not they want to launch an idea, but they're interested in innovating,
Yep.
And jobs that involve innovation or working for organizations that, are really, driven by innovation. How do you recommend this framework be applied in those kinds of positions?
Yeah, I love it. I'm a huge fan of whether you call it entrepreneurship or you just call it that entrepreneurial career. This is advice I wish I'd really had when I was at my 4 years at Accenture. It's a very entrepreneurial place. You really do have to go out of your way to make the career what you want. And it really is about doing that thing, right? And so doing a thing, right? Publishing a little report, right? Hosting a meetup. Things that will, one, definitely won't scale, but two, might seem nominal, right? They might seem just, flash in the pan. If you keep at anything consistently, it will compound, right? And so I'm literally just actually applying that idea of start a meetup, start a newsletter, write a report. If 23 or 4-year-old Andrew had done those inside of Accenture around an area that I was passionate about, heck, it didn't even have to be a passionate, it just could be the thing I was getting assigned to that day or that month or that year, I would have stood it way out. So personally, I would have stood out, but also people would have come to me, right? I would have been able to host, here's an idea, super tactical. I won't take all the credit for it. I won't take credit for it, but I can't give credit. I don't know who said it. If you were working at a job, start a podcast, an internal podcast only released to your company, and interview senior leaders about issues of the day. So if you work inside of Visa and payments, just go find the most senior person you can, interview them about Plaid, Stripe, payments, and then release it internally as a little thought leadership piece. You will move yourself way up, you will create dialogue, and that's where the ideas are. So I can't tell you exactly how they come down to earth, but that is where the ideas are, right? And so doing these things, oh my gosh, nothing comes without just putting yourself forward.
Absolutely. How do you deal with others not taking your ideas seriously?
So the nature of entrepreneurship is that good ideas seem bad, and frankly, bad ideas seem good. And this is the rub between true entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship, which is entrepreneurship. So much of success of a project or even your career is dependent on gatekeepers, and it's a game. True entrepreneurship isn't. The only game is, does the market want it? Does it work, right? Will people pay you for it, right? It's very simple metrics of success. It's a profit margin. Do you have profit? And so, data is always the best answer. If it doesn't work, go ship it, go launch it, get the data, show that it works, show that people want it, right? So if you ever run up into that, get Gorilla, right? Go figure out how to test it, whether it's a simple thing like a survey and get that qualitative data, or put a landing page up, do that Kickstarter. Again, I can imagine all sorts of frictions in terms of a corporate setting, but this is where you probably want to be a little more guerrilla, ask some forgiveness, and no one can compete with data, right? And so good corporate innovation settings create space for these types of experiments. They create space for entrepreneurial experiments that probably will fail, right? But really, there is a real catch-22, which is good ideas seem bad. And if you're dependent on other people seeing them as good, that's kind of that's just not a good environment for innovation, right? It just won't happen. I am a Paul Graham fanboy. So if you read about, Paul Graham writes that at Y Combinator, they purposefully invest in companies that they kind of at first blush don't think will make it, because they know they're going to be wrong enough, and they've created a business model where they get to invest in 500 companies at a time, so they can take 50 outlier shots. But he basically says, if we have too high a percentage of success in the early funding rounds right after a kind of launch or after an accelerator cohort, it means we played it too safe. It means we basically only invested in companies that other people think are good, and like people are just wrong all the time. You really want to be an outlier. So all to say, that's like the principle. Definitely some like trouble, like difficulty applying it for sure, but you got to ship something. It's easy to say, harder to do. I totally recognize that.
That's great advice. So then you mentioned early on in your presentation that freelancers can be considered part of this entrepreneurial economy.
Yeah.
Does that mean that freelancers can find value in utilizing the entrepreneurial process? And if yes, how would you like apply this framework for freelancers?
Yeah, love it. And I can see the question, so I got that.
Okay.
Yeah, so the premise, absolutely, right? I totally think freelancers are part of the entrepreneurial economy. They're a very specific form of entrepreneurship business, because you're selling a service, you're selling your services generally, right? And in a lot of ways, it's like if you're part of a company, you've sold your services in year-long contracts, right? A freelancer is selling your services without year-long contracts, a la carte, whatever you call it. And so the nature of the beast is like nicely adjacent. So it's easier for entrepreneurs to get into per se, right? Assuming you have a marketable service. Freelancing requires you to go sell your services constantly, right? Requires you to go figure out who's the buyer. That's a big part of the entrepreneurial game, right? Like instead of a job where you basically let someone in the company is selling, somebody is doing marketing, but a freelancer and an entrepreneur is doing production and sales all in one package, especially when you're freelancing. So all that to say, how would you use the process? Definitely think about what you're passionate about. Definitely think about what you're good at. In fact, it's probably more important, because you can't really fudge it. If you're not good at it, you're not going to make it, right? Think about where you have like connections, domain expertise. So actually, now that I'm thinking out loud about it, it's more important to think about you, where you want to be. And then it's probably also more important for you to go like live in the industry where you want to go be, make connections, understand what the problems are. And in some ways, you have to very organically be like, well, I can solve that. Boom, boom, boom. I'm going to go make that for you, right? I'm going to go do that for you. And from there, you've got the beginning. You might want to do some moonlighting and like see it happen. And then you're at the beginning of your freelancing career. So I actually see it being more important to follow the steps. When you think about that like core insight, the what, it might be simpler. It might just be problem solution, right? There's a group of people who basically don't know how to make websites. So I'm just going to do that for them, right? There's a group of small businesses that don't have local Google presences. I'm going to go do that for them, right? Like there's just as many problems as could be solved. You can go be the solution. It's treating yourself like a business. Who is your customer? What is their problem? What is your solution? Is there an insight? Are you better than the alternatives, right? I'll stop there, because basically the answer is yes, you can absolutely just run the process. There are definitely some more nuances around freelancing and how to like make the most of a freelance career that are different than like optimizing a business, just because it is just you. There's definitely a capped upside. To succeed looks a little different, but it's also, again, probably conceptually the same. To succeed is to pick a niche, get very good at it, understand them very deeply, solve a small problem first, and then go from there. So yeah, love the idea. Please go freelance. Love it.
How do you handle domain issues?
Oh, I saw that. I guess I have a follow-up, which is like, what is a domain issue, right? And it's anonymous. It's hard to tell. So that's not entirely clear what a domain issue is. I mean, when I think of domain can be anything. Domain could be like elder care, right? I was thinking about that as an example. when I was first starting day one, I was chatting with a founder friend of mine who had family, wanted to like solve the issue there. A lot of us probably have experienced it, but maybe because it's an industry without tons of entrepreneurial people, it's pretty backwards, right? There's not much solutions. So she went super deep. She wasn't a domain expert, but she literally got all her certifications to go do literally elder care. She, or home care rather. She literally applied for jobs. I think she even took jobs, right? She like went on the platforms. So she went as deep as anyone could to the point where she was a domain expert in like 18 months time. So I don't know if I'm answering the question. I'm just giving an example of like a domain can be anything, could be that kind of like, I don't know if that you'd call that an industry, I guess you would, or it could be like a more deeper like industry, like mechanical engineering, and you know the cutting edge of that, or software engineering, and you know what the next dev tool is going to be, right? So the tons of ways to cut domain. And again, the issues are going to be dependent on the domain, almost by definition.
So then the last question is, essentially, what are your recommendations for like cold calling or cold contacting people in industry areas that they need to connect with to continue to explore their idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's definitely a lot of where my kind of whole point of like do something is, because having done something to give value into the ecosystem you want to play in is just like, is the door opener of all door openers, right? So write an industry report, host that meetup, start a newsletter, etc. Start that podcast internally. And then podcasts are great. Start a podcast, go invite them on it. Everyone wants to be given that little bit of exposure. You're definitely going to, whatever area you pick, you're probably going to have to start at the bottom before you get to like some of the more exclusive, famous, whomever people, right? But I've like, this isn't the answer of like how to like really gain credibility. If you really want to build in a space, it's a long-term journey, right? So just go like lean all the way in. You're gonna have to do some cold calling and some cold emailing. Again, have that thing that you're doing to offer it up. Maybe it's like I said, maybe it's literally a podcast. Hey, I'd love to interview you for X, an amazing hack. I've worked on projects on businesses because this was my job. I was jumping from business to business in areas I had no expertise or domain expertise. And I can break in. It is doable. It takes a second. You do some LinkedIn outreach, you get a few to connect with you, you do some more LinkedIn outreach. They see you have second connections. They don't know that second connection is like 2 days old, but now they think you're like connected to these people. They'll connect with you. Now you have more second connections. It snowballs. And that's like really manufacturing it, right? And it's possible to do it in a few weeks. If you're serious, I would say you bite off months and you slowly do that and you make real relationships. You get on the phone with them. You say, I'm doing something in this space. Can you tell me all about your issues? Can you blah, 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 whatever, right? So if you're earnest, I have zero, and you show up as like an intelligent, smart person, so many professionals want to be helping founders. They want to be closer to the action. They will help you. They will answer your LinkedIn, email, DM, whatever they call it. If you say, I'm a founder building for this in your space, solving your problems, can I pick your brain? And you seem like young, earnest, and etc. Heck, you don't even have to be young, earnest, and etc. They'll go after it, like they will. So, and you might get 8 no's out of 10, but still, that's a good ratio. So, very, very, very doable. Have the things, be earnest, make it a commitment, do something good, and just like slowly chip away at it. Like most industries are just little networks, right? People do know each other, and if you can break in, you've broken in. So, yeah, it's definitely I think every place is like that. And then read the room, like figure out if that's like an area you want to hang out in, right? Like you might be like, I'm going to go serve developers or crypto folks and realize I don't like this vibe. Those are not my people. Then that's great. You just learned it. Go somewhere else. Go help the healthcare folks, right? Whatever it looks like. Yeah, very, very possible. Those are my thoughts, my tips.
Well, this has just been great. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us.
Yeah.
And thank you to our attendees. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks again, Andrew.
Likewise. Thank you everybody for joining. See you all around.
Bye.